Another weekend, another headline, and honestly, I would just say the absolute credibility is shot with anything that Trump has to sort of say. So where we at? It is Tuesday. It's the 4th of August. It's 9:46 a.m. And look, I'll start off with the dollar here because this thing is just really the last couple of sessions, ever since that data point last week, has just been absolutely clobbered. It's been a couple of things on top of a couple of other things, but obviously we had the sort of FOMC to sort of start things off. That was a little bit sort of disappointing for the market. Obviously, we could see the reaction as it happened there, but then really these larger slapdowns here, this has become more of a sort of yen play in that with it all, and we can tell that because if we look at like how the dollar is crossed with a bunch of other things. Like it permeates across all USD crosses. So everything will be sort of whacked with it, but it's not all to the same extent. Like this is pretty far down in a very short amount of time. And we're not sort of seeing some of the other crosses and that sort of really fly to the upside as you may have expected them to be. And certainly, if we look at sort of how gold's moving in relation to sort of how much the dollar's just been sold off recently, we're not seeing gold really showing large signs of recovery. Actually, gold is holding on by its teeth in that to the lows, but I'll get to that in a moment because we tested just down underneath sort of 40.20 again last night. Buyers stepped in, or maybe it was some short profit taking in that, but we saw it sort of like bounce straight back up. And yeah, well, I'll get to gold in that in a moment. So with the dollar here, look, I can clear a bit of this up because we know what we want to see. Like whether this sort of came here or not, that's still how you're going to see a form of recovery. What we did see was this exact move here, which was obviously rallied back up. These buyers turned into sellers, support and resistance, same thing. And then we saw this move come down here. So it's started that cycle again, bang down into one leg here. Found support. We're coming up to find some level of resistance. So we can pretty much assume at some point whether this, look, honestly, I think this bounce might come a little bit high, and I think we may be looking something a little bit more like this. But that's kind of how you're going to have to sort of see this thing sort of recover. Let's just clear it up just so we can see a bit more of it. But I mean, look, potentially, look, it's a long way off in that, but should we sort of get a move back up into this area, expect a little bit of a pushback down, could be setting up for a little bit of an inverted head and shoulders should that play out. Look, this is a little bit early to call, but these are the starting points of what you would see for an inverted head and shoulders, which obviously would give us a little bit more of a recovery. Now, the question with that is sort of like, yes, we know that the yen's been the big sort of driver with this thing. Is the rest of the market happy to sort of go, okay, yep, that's done for now, and we can get back on with the things pushing up here? If we actually zoom out onto a daily time frame, look at where it's actually sort of found support right along this rising support over here. So, we obviously didn't get this big break up through here. This thing got, as I just said a moment ago, quite spectacularly slapped down the last couple of sessions. But, you know what, it's burnt off a little bit of thing. It's really retesting this last sort of, well, not this last, but like this big sort of resistance area that, was really capping it for 13 months, 14 months or so. So look, I wouldn't be surprised if, again, if we get a little bit of push up, it's not going to just come back up in a V shape necessarily, but up, down, there'll be if we get back onto the 4 hour, these are the kind of things that we can look for to say, hey, look, it's confirming a little bit more. Let's get these out of the way. Is going to be something to contend with once it does come up over here as well, if it does get up over here. So, look, I just don't think that, what we've sort of seen recently, we know what's been the driver, main thing being the yen. It's not like a whole market consensus to say, hey, look, the dollar's done for. Yes, there was that sort of initial move over here where we kind of sort of said, look, the market was expecting it to be a little bit more hawkish. Sorry, wash to be a little bit more hawkish. Didn't get that. And then it just seemed to be a bit of a coordinated, well-timed attack to really sort of hammer things down after that initial hit through here. So, and look, I mean, realistically, everybody that's been sort of like long on the dollar through here, they're all been wiped out through here if they're trailing their stops or not taking profits along the way. So it's a question about, is this it? I would be reluctant to sort of think that we're going to keep going down at this point, only just for the fact that, as I said, look, we know what drove it. We know it was a yen sort of move with it all. We can sort of have a look at, those are the sellers, here are some sellers, here are some sellers, and we've broken that little falling resistance here. Hasn't flown. Like, as I said, I don't think this is just going to go straight up like this. But to me, it kind of feels like we may be grinding to a bit of a point where we may see a bit more support come in for the dollar here. I mean, certainly if we look at this last move down here, this is on the 4 hour as well. You take this low and this low down here. Mark that out as a negative divergence for us. This low and this low here, there's a negative divergence. Now, we've obviously sort of played this part out a little bit already. But as I said, with these negative divergences, I give them between sort of 8 and 12, 8 and 13 candles to kind of play out. We've got about sort of 7 or so in this move here. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do grind a little bit higher, see some pullback, maybe set up for this inverted head and shoulders. I mean, you know, we're not even up to a neckline in this, so it might be a bit early to call, but this is the starting building blocks of what we could see. Should we see a move up here? Should we see a move back down like this? Then all of a sudden it starts to build out that picture. We know where our confirmation line is, which would be above this sort of 100.4, and we know that that's a trigger to sort of go, okay, yep, bang, we've got a little bit of a low there, and we can sort of see a little bit more dollar recovery here. But as I said, we'll see how it goes. It's 9:52 now, so it's still only early very early in the session. But I would say that probably we're getting to a part where we're going to see some balance. And where it's important is because, as I said, sort of like, this big move is quite a dramatic drop off very quickly. I mean, again, look, I'll just show. That's what you're seeing with the yen. You know what I mean? So we're sort of seeing this thing as really sort of come off quite a lot. But then if we look at sort of things that, like, obviously we're trading here, so like gold has not really made use of this at all. Gold is kind of really sort of like, it's got its little double bottom here, but these bounces are coming in a little bit lower. It's a good segue through to gold actually here, we can sort of say. But, with the kind of sort of comparison or the kind of sort of relationship that you see between the dollar and gold, you would expect to see gold at least pushing at some breakout points. It has not done anything. In fact, as I said, it's kind of like at its lows at the moment. Let's clean it up a little bit. But, it is at its lows, and we know where the break point is. Underneath sort of 40.20 with the close down here, because we tested it on Friday, Saturday morning, Friday, whatever, got the bounce. Tested it again overnight, got the bounce. But what are the bounces? What are the sellers doing with this thing? And we know where it's going to change. If you get above this zone over here, this is where the sellers are. That's where the sellers are. And you can see them slowly moving down. So should this revisit 40.20 and break through, I would say that that's probably a time that we're going to see a little bit of a break down further. Now that changes if you get above 40.90, then we're looking back up to 41.20 for potential breakouts to the top side there, should we see the dollar continue to come back down. But I just sort of feel at the moment in that sort of like, as I said, I think the dollar's probably due for a little bit of a bounce with that. So maybe we get a test down over here, see the dollar come off, we see a bit of a bounce, we sort of play around in this area. But certainly as it is, as at this point right now, you can see the sellers are moving down, they're applying pressure down here. And if we sort of draw it out, like, so we've got an actual, you can see with the line, take that arrow off there. You can see that they're applying pressure down here. And this is a bit of a sort of falling triangle. Again, look, if we do see this flip, I mean, this has come in a little bit higher over here than this low here. So we got a nice-ish kind of, I wouldn't really say negative divergence, but, we can see that the buying pressure was a little bit higher than it was certainly previously here. It was coming back down. But the point is, it's sort of like, you can see the sellers are applying pressure here. If the sellers keep pushing down like this, well, what's going to happen? You're going to run out of space here and you're going to pop and break down through the bottom over there. So I think that's kind of, as of this point right now, that's the risk. Now, we saw a pretty decent little bounce off this area here. Now, we can see, obviously, give or take a couple of bucks. This is where the buyers are sort of sitting with it all. So should we see them actually start to change and overrun this level of sellers, confirmations above 40.90. Above 40.90, as I said, you're back up to testing 41.20, and maybe then we've sort of found a little bit of low. But I think if we're going to see that, we're going to have to see the dollar continue to remain weak. And It may, it may. I mean, this is the thing. Anything could happen. This is why we need to sort of do the analysis to sort of prepare for both outcomes. But as it is at the moment, yes, it's bouncing off this zone, but the sellers are still pushing and applying more pressure down each time. So should we come back to 41.20, that would probably be the time that we go for the bigger break to the downside, in my opinion. Have a quick look at silver. Silver, look, let's drag this out a little bit as well. Little zone through here. This is where we know the buyers are kind of sitting. Again, plus or minus a couple of bucks or so. But we are sort of seeing, the buyers are holding this zone here. But again, it's almost a similar sort of story in which we're seeing the bounces that are coming from about the same zone. They're coming in a little bit less each time. So this is what they need to overrun. This is this level here. These are the sellers you need to get on top of. So you get above sort of 59.30, back up to testing 60.40 and 60.50, plus or minus a couple of cents, and then maybe you push on a little bit. The fact that the RSI is a little bit higher here, I think sort of gives the idea that we may see a little bit of a bounce. I mean, we're flipping, this is on a 4 hour right now. I mean, this could just open up and put in a big candle here. It's got the workings to it. What's the 1 hour look like? 1 hour, not so bad. But as you can see, popped down to this area, took out those lows. There's those liquidity sweeps we were talking about the other week. And you can see it's just grinding back up here. But you need to overcome the fact that these sellers, as you can see, we were starting for a range, but all of a sudden the sellers are applying more. We're not seeing the buyers step up. They're holding the line, yes, but we want to sort of see a pullback and actually actively move up. So you want to see sort of like a push, a move like that, and then move forward. And then we can actively say, here with the buyers, now they're saying, hey, look, I'm not going to wait down here, because at the moment they're just waiting at the lows. Yeah, they're buying it, they're absorbing it, but they're not actively pushing up higher. And that'll sort of change once we sort of see, obviously, sort of like, a bit of a push above sort of 39 or so. But for now, it is the same sort of story. As you can see, they're accepting a little bit less each time. And this is very much almost like a short squeezy kind of push here. You know what I mean? It's not back and forth, back and forth. It's like taking out the lows. Imagine all the people that got short as they broke through here, put my short entry here, they get filled, all of a sudden it reverses, they're getting squeezed. So if you just take out the highs over here and then start to move back down, it's probably a sign that we're probably actually going to be revisiting that sort of 56 zone there as well. And finally, just sort of tick along, pretty quick sort of flick through the charts this morning. Have a look at Aussie. Because Aussie, again, back up into that sell zone. Look, the bounces have been quite strong on Aussie, to be perfectly frank in that. We've got the pushback down here, push back up. That's fine. Look, as I said, I think Aussie's just becoming a bit of a chop fest, to be honest. I mean, look, it's dancing with this massive sort of like support zone, but it is either side of it constantly. So it's almost like you can get rid of that one to a certain degree. But look, as I said, if we see the dollar push back up here, this is the thing, sort of like Aussie was doing quite well come Friday, but yesterday had a shocking day, even while the dollar, I mean, the dollar recovered a little bit yesterday, but you could see very quickly they were happy to sort of get rid of the Aussie, and they sort of pushed this back down under here. So again, look, I always sort of say 90s are always a good sort of point for a bit of a fade or profit taking. Look at where we hit 91, bang, we move back up, down to the 90s again, and it's starting to bounce through here. If you look at this in terms of again, you got to sort of take it from both sides. Buyers are looking at it like this. It's held 50% of this bounce. Okay. You kind of almost held that the other week, actually. Hold on, let's put that. So at the time it was 38%, put in a new high. Didn't really do much with it. So let's clean this up. What I'm sort of looking at with this is, particularly if we do get a bit of a bounce from the dollar, is the fact that this sell down has really only been able to manage to get to the 23%. So I still think that this looks like it wants to push down for another leg, and we'd be sort of looking more around this zone next, around sort of 60s. That'll be the area in which I do think you probably will get a bit of a reaction. move this across over here. I do think you get a bit of a reaction should you break it, and we know where we're going, 69.20s, that's fine. But at the moment, to me, it just doesn't feel like this is really like, I mean, look at the reaction here, straight back up, come down, not really so much, you know what I mean? Like, it's really just, yeah, it's tried to bounce. Yeah, it's tried to bounce. It's an area in which we could probably expect a little bit of a reaction. It was at previous highs over here. You know, we've got a little bit of a zone through here. These are the resistance. Now it's the supports. You know, so I don't know. Look, if you get back above sort of maybe 70, 15 or so, clears out all these areas through here, we might sort of see it. If the dollar does go for another leg through today, oh, wow. Maybe I spoke a little bit soon. Something's just happened. Gold's just done a nice little... Let's jump back on gold for 1 sec. Yep, so it's just popped through here. This is kind of what you almost want to see, though, with these things in terms of these falling resistances. I said the other day, you want to see a decent move as you sort of go through them. 10 o'clock, and they've just hammered it through to the top side here. So we could be seeing something of a little bit of a turnaround here. I don't know. I'm still reluctant to buy it just at this point, but certainly that's a bit of a committed little spike there. Just see if there's any news that's actually driven. It's just 10 o'clock open, I think. Just having a sort of quick look around now to see if there's anything. There's a little bit of a report here. This is 18 minutes ago, though, so I don't know. We'll see how this goes. Interesting sort of thing at the moment with this move is that oil and gold are both spiking. Generally, at the moment, we're not sort of seeing that as two things that are sort of running together. So we'll see which one sort of leads out with this. But if this is the driver, I mean, look, it's 10 o'clock. This was a few minutes ago anyway, or 18 minutes ago, whatever. But as of, it could just be sort of 10 o'clock open volume that's sort of adding into that. Dollar's giving back a little bit at the moment. But if this were to be the driver, this sort of thing of sort of like, reports vessel hit near Hamas, as Iran strike reports emerge, that's obviously going to probably mean that sort of if we're going to see one or the other run, we're probably going to see oil hold that move a little bit more there. Let's jump onto something a little bit lower. See, have we got any reaction? Yeah, pretty sort of subdued, muted reaction there. Anyway, look, we've got a little bit of a bounce in Aussie here, but again, if you get above like 70.15, okay, fine. We can look back up to these zones over here, mid-20s or so. But for me at the moment, this looks like it's just biding a bit of time till we see the next leg a little bit lower there. All right, so just quickly have a look at any sort of data that we had. So overnight, we did have, let's update this one. I don't know why you're asking for bots on the site, but back in a sec. All right, let's get along here. We did have ISM overnight, big beat actually. So 55 is quite a decent number in that. So they're expecting a little bit of a tick up anyway, but they've obviously sort of had 55.6. And this is what I keep saying, like the economic data in the US is actually still comparatively quite strong. So, I think that was the big sort of shocker that because the inflation's still quite high, and the economic data's not bad. We got job numbers, which is going to be a big one this week, I think, NFP. People were a little bit sort of shocked, hence the sort of the sell-off of the dollar when Warsh failed to sort of act really sort of to sort of hawkish on things. Yeah, we're seeing oil sort of take off a little bit at the moment, 80.50, so a little bit of recovery from that big gap down over the weekend. Jobs tonight, JOLTS, so job openings and that, so a slight little tick down there. Look, this is certainly one that plays into it all. It's not necessarily going to be a massive mover. We're looking a little bit of a tick down, so if anything, it's a little bit negative on the dollar for it there. We'll sort of see how this goes. Interested to just see how this sort of this move plays out because, as I said, oil's still pushing up towards 81-ish. Well, it's 80.70 at the second. Gold's holding that little break around 40.60. So we'll see how that goes. But apart from that, there's not a great deal of data. I suppose we've got job advertisements in Australia as well for what it's worth. Household spending, that's coming out shortly. But that's about it for the moment. I think the market's really going to be sort of setting itself up. We've got ADP looking to slow down. ADP's actually been pretty weak the last, weaker sort of under expectations a fair bit recently. So we'll sort of be looking forward towards the end of the week for those NFP numbers, where we're looking for a slight little tick up. So that's obviously a little bit more sort of positive for the dollar. All right, just a quick one this morning, and is it from me.